Hello everyone, this is Glenda Winkleman and welcome back to Creative Grandma. I have a new stitch of the week for you today. This is pattern number 247, the stacked V-stitch bobble stitch. I've been seeing this stitch pattern on my Facebook group for a while now, and they never leave the instructions, they leave a graft. So I thought everybody's asking for the pattern. I'm going to go ahead and work this up, and there's a few things you need to know about this pattern. Now, when I researched this pattern, the chart that they showed to make this stitch, each row went back to the previous row to start the next row. So if you worked row 1 across, when you got done with row 1, you would fasten off and come back to the beginning of row 1 and join your new color in the same beginning V-stitch that you started in row 1 to start row 2. And I thought, well, if you're working in one solid color, that would be a real pain. You know, you don't want to fasten off every row when you're working in one color. So this pattern was written, so if you're working in one color, you're going to turn your work each time you do a row. But if you're working in more than one color, you're going to have to fasten off and go back to the beginning of the previous row. Now that's up to you whether you want to or not. But this is how your stitches look when you work them all on the right side. So when you turn your work over, you can see the difference. This is the wrong side. So when you work with more than one color, it's recommended to go back and start in the beginning of the previous row. So this is my first sample, and my first sample was made using several different colors. I used pink, yellow, blue, green, and lavender, and these are all Red Heart Super Saver worsted weight yarn. Now my second sample I made, this is a solid white sample that I always make. The pattern's not as noticeable in this, and this one I turn my work with each row. I do not fasten off. So this is the difference. I'm not sure if you can see the difference, but that's the difference. And this sample was made using Red Heart Super Saver white, and I actually was able to go to a Hobby Lobby, which I don't get there very often because it's too far away, and I found this beautiful yarn called I Love This Yarn. And this is by Hobby Lobby. It's a super soft worsted weight yarn, and this color is number 416 Sunset. It's a beautiful, really soft colored yarn of many different colors. And this is what it looks like when it's worked up. So those are my samples, and those are some of the notes I wanted to go over. Now if you want to make your sample with me, today I'm just using two colors. I'm going to use white, and I'm going to use this beautiful Aruba Sea. This is Aruba Sea color number 505 by Red Heart Super Saver, and I'm just going to use white, and we need to chain 36. So I'm using, for my swatch here today, I'm going to use a size H8 or a 5mm crochet hook. So I'll be right back and we'll get this stitch started. I already have my yarn tied on my hook, and we're going to begin by chaining 36. So you're going to take the yarn over your hook and pull it through the loop you tied around your hook. That's your first chain, and this does not count as a chain. So yarn over, pull it through, that's 2, yarn over, pull it through the loop, that's 3, yarn over, pull it through the loop, that's 4. You want to continue until you have a total of 36 chains, and I'll be right back to start the pattern. I have my chain 36 made, and we're going to get ready to start row 1. So let me zoom up a little, and again, we're working a bobble stitch. It's called a stacked V-stitch bobble stitch because we're using bobble stitches to make these stitches here. This is a bobble stitch. We're going to chain 2 and work a bobble stitch, which creates our V-stitch. So that is why we have that name, the V-stitch bobble stitch. So don't let that confuse you. Here's your bobble stitch, and this creates your V-stitch. So that's what we're going to be doing. So to begin, our first bobble stitch will be different because we're going to skip 2 chain, which acts as the first double crochet of the bobble. So we're going to work a double crochet into the 3rd chain from our hook. So skip the first 2 chain, yarn over the hook, insert it into that 3rd chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the stitch. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only, yarn over the hook and pull it through your 2 loops. This creates the first bobble stitch of our V-stitch. You're going to chain 2. Now we're going to work the bobble stitch the way you're going to work it across your row. Yarn over the hook, you're going to insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through that chain. You have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over the hook and pull it through 2 loops only. You made your first double crochet and you're leaving the last loop on your hook. We're going to do that one more time. Yarn over the hook, you're going to insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the chain. You have 4 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only. You made your second double crochet, leaving the last loop on your hook. You have 3 loops on your hook. We're going to yarn over and pull it through all 3 loops on your hook. We just made our first V-stitch bobble. So now we're going to start our repeat across our row. We're going to skip the next 2 chain. Again, this is the start of your repeat. You're going to skip the next 2 chain and we're going to work 1 bobble, chain 2, and a bobble stitch all in this next chain. So yarn over the hook, skip 2 chain, insert it into that 3rd chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops. We made our first double crochet of our first bobble, leaving the last loop on the hook. We need to do that one more time to complete our bobble. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops. You just made your second double crochet of our first bobble. Now we need to complete our bobble. We have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over the hook and pull it through all 3 loops. You just made your first bobble stitch. We're going to chain 2. 1, 2. We're going to make another bobble stitch and we're going to do it in the same chain. So yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the chain. Yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only. We just made our first double crochet of our bobble stitch, leaving the last loop on the hook. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it back through that chain, yarn over the hook and pull it through 2 loops only. You just made your second double crochet of our second bobble stitch, leaving the last loop on the hook, and now we're going to finish our last bobble stitch by yarn over and pull through all 3 loops on hook. You just made your V-stitch bobble. I'll show you one more time and then you're just going to repeat this across the row, and when you get to the end of your chain you'll be working this same V-stitch in the very last chain. So the pattern ends right in the last chain. So let's do it one more time. Yarn over the hook, you're going to skip the next 2 chain, you're going to insert your hook into that 3rd chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through the chain. Yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops. We have 2 loops on our hook, so yarn over the hook, insert it into that chain, the same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it back through the chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only. We have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over the hook and pull it through 3 loops. You just made your first bobble of the next V-stitch. You're going to chain 2. We're going to work one more bobble stitch in the same chain. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain, yarn over the hook, pull it back through that chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only. 2 loops on hook. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain space, yarn over the hook, pull it back through the chain, yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only. We have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over the hook and pull through all 3 loops. You just made your V-stitch bobble. So go ahead and repeat that across your foundation row, and I will meet you at the end of row 1. I'm over at the end of row 1, and this is what your work should look like. You should have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 V-stitches across your work. Now this is the important part, and this will be the start of how you're going to make the pattern throughout. So if you're at the end of row 1 and you're going to use the same color, you're going to use this Aruba C and make the whole Afghan the same color, you're just going to turn your work when you're finished with row 1. You're going to insert your hook from front to back through that chain 2 space, and you're going to slip stitch. Yarn over the hook, pull it through that chain 2 space, and pull it through the loop on your hook. And this gets you in the starting position to start row 2. Now, it's up to you how you want to make this pattern. If you're using 2 colors, you can turn your work every row, but it's recommended, again, I'm going to repeat myself, it's recommended when you're using more than 1 color to go ahead and go back to the beginning of the previous row. So when you're done with row 1, you would return to the beginning of row 1 to start row 2. And that makes all your stitches done on the right side of the work, and you're not seeing the back side, but however you want to do it. So I just showed you how to turn your work when you're using 1 color. Now I'm using 2, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this out, so please don't let me confuse you. I'm going to pull that out, and I'm going to fasten off my work. And I'm going back to the beginning of row 1 where I started. I'm just going to insert my hook into the chain 2 space of that first V-stitch. I'm going to grab my new color, and I leave about 3 inches. And all I'm going to do is just let my yarn hang, and I'm just going to pull that new color through. I'm going to chain 2. And our first V-stitch bobble is always different because of this beginning chain 2. I'm going to work a double crochet into the same chain 2 space. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that chain 2 space, and just work a regular double crochet. Going to chain 2. Now we're going to work our bobble for the second half of our V-stitch. And again, I'm working right over my end. So yarn over the hook, insert it into that same beginning chain 2 space, yarn over the hook, pull it back through that space, yarn over the hook, and pull it through 2 loops. We have 2 loops on the hook. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain 2 space, yarn over the hook, and pull it back through that space, yarn over the hook, and pull it through 2 loops. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, and pull it through all 3 loops. We just made our beginning V-stitch bobble. And what you're going to do is you're just going to work a V-stitch bobble in the chain 2 space of each V-stitch bobble across, and all you're doing is stacking them. You're working them one right on top of the other. Now this end in the back, I do let that just hang there, and I'll come back with the yarn needle and weave in all my ends. So let me show you one more time. We're going to do a V-stitch bobble in the chain 2 space of the next V-stitch. So yarn over the hook, insert it into that next chain 2 space of that next V-stitch, yarn over the hook, pull it back through that space, yarn over the hook, and pull it through 2 loops. Yarn over the hook, insert it into that same chain 2 space, yarn over the hook, pull it back through that space, yarn over the hook, and pull it through 2 loops. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, and pull it through all 3 loops on your hook. Chain 2, 1, 2. Yarn over the hook, you're going to insert it into that same chain 2 space of that same V-stitch, yarn over the hook, and pull it back through. Yarn over the hook, pull it through 2 loops only, 2 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, insert it back into that same chain 2 space, yarn over the hook, pull it back through, yarn over the hook, and pull it through 2 loops. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, and pull it through all 3 loops on your hook. You just worked your V-stitch bobble. So for row 2, you're just going to go ahead and work 1 V-stitch bobble stitch, which is a bobble stitch, chain 2 bobble stitch, in each chain 2 space of each V-stitch across. So go ahead and work across row 2, and I will meet you at the end of row 2. I'm over at the end of row 2, and this is what your work should look like. Now row 2 is your repeat row. This is just a 1 row repeat, very simple pattern. So I'm going to show you one more time how you turn your work depending on if you're using 1 color or 2 or more colors. If you're using 1 color, you're just going to stop at the end of the row and you're going to turn your work. You're going to insert your hook into the chain 2 space of that first V-stitch, and you're going to slip stitch. Yarn over the hook, pull it through that space and through the loop on your hook. This gets you in the position to start your first V-stitch bobble of row 3, and you'll just continue doing this in each row if you're working with 1 color. If you're not working with 1 color, I'm going to pull this out. When you're working with more than 1 color, you're going to fasten off. And you're going to return to the beginning of the row you just completed. So I came back to the beginning of the row. You're going to insert your hook into that chain 2 space of that first V-stitch. I'm just going to grab my color. I leave about 3 inches and I just pull that new color through, and you're going to start immediately by chaining 2 of that first bobble stitch in the instructions. You will work a double crochet, and that is the first bobble of the first V-stitch. And that is how you turn your work. So if you need to see again how to do this pattern, just revert back to where I started row 2 at the end of row 1, and just keep clicking back as many times as you need until you get the hang of making the stitch in this pattern. It's a really wonderful pattern. I liked it so much because when you do a shell stitch, sometimes the holes are a lot bigger, and if you look at this V-stitch bobble, the holes are not as large. It's just a nice closer pattern. The holes are not as large. So it's a wonderful pattern. So I hope you had fun today with me learning a new stitch of the week. Again, this is stitch pattern number 247, the stacked V-stitch bobble stitch. This pattern is available on my website, creativegrandma.net. Just go to the top of the website, clear to the right, you'll see a little bar that says Stitch of the Week. Click on that and it shows you all my Stitch of the Week. If you click on the name of the stitch, you can download it right to your computer immediately, free of charge. If you click on the photo, it takes you right back to this how-to video and it'll show you how to do it. So I suggest get on the website, start printing those Stitch of the Week patterns out, start yourself a little notebook, get a crochet library built up. You never know when you want to try something new. You'll have your stitches available. So thank you everybody, and happy crocheting.